Jeff McNeil will miss the start of the season with an oblique strain. Is this where he gets Wally Pipped? We'll talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Now, Jeff McNeil will miss the start of the season with an oblique strain. For those of you who missed it, I did a live stream right as the news broke where I did talk about this injury. But if you did miss it, essentially this is a low-grade oblique strain. Jeff McNeil played on Monday. He felt some soreness in his oblique. He took a day off. The soreness persisted. They got an MRI that showed that low-grade strain. This is not a major injury. This is one where they say he's going to rest for 7 to 10 days. If all goes well, he can ramp back up. The timeline for his return right now has been set at 3 to 4 weeks, which does open up an opportunity, although a very, very small one, for Brett Baty and or Luisangel Acuña to get some run at second base. If you just look at the timeline, let's say it's 3 weeks. It's 3 weeks. Jeff McNeil theoretically doesn't even have to go on the 10-day IL. He could be back by the home opener, but I don't think that we're going to see that. They're going to IL him to start the season. Let's say it's just a 10-day IL stint. Well, it's 8 games into the season, so it doesn't give you much runway when you're looking at the young players, but as the old story goes with Wally Pipp, well, it takes a couple days for a Lou Gehrig to come along and take your spot. So I'm not necessarily saying that Brett Baty is actually going to come through in the first 8 games of the season and solidify second base forever. But there is now a pathway, depending on this injury and how long McNeil's out and how much runway these guys get, where that position at second base might not be handed to Jeff McNeil when he comes back, and other guys may push him for playing time, guys that could have a huge role in the Mets' future, who are under team control, who are cheap, who really could be pieces for this ball club, and right now did not have that clear pathway to starting playing time, and all of a sudden, it's there for them. The question is, who's going to get those opportunities? And as you hear Carlos Mendoza talk about this injury, he said that there was 4 guys competing for 1 roster spot, and now there's 4 guys competing for 2 roster spots. The 4 guys that he's referring to: Brett Baty, Luisangel Acuña, Donovan Walton, and Luis de los Santos. We've been talking about this position battle all throughout camp, and I've always said it was going to come down to Baty or Acuña, and I've also said for a long time that Baty had the edge because I believed he was going to be, best positioned to have a great spring training. And so far offensively, he has absolutely done that. He has proven to be up to the task of winning a job in camp and was putting himself in line to get that utility infielder role. Luisangel Acuña, he's starting to swing a better bat, but it has taken some time. What he gives you is a great floor defensively, but he also is a player that has plenty of room to develop more in AAA. So that's why I always thought it was going to be Baty. The Mets' decision now is, all right, Baty's going to make this team. The one thing I can guarantee, there is no world where Brett Baty is not on the roster on opening day. Not going to happen. I cannot envision Luisangel Acuña and Donovan Walton making it. There's just no chance. Baty will be there. The second spot could go to a Donovan Walton or a Luis de los Santos if the Mets feel that Luisangel Acuña should start the year in AAA. Last year, we saw it. I mentioned this on the live stream after the injury. We saw it where JD Martinez was only supposed to be, on that, whatever it was. He took a minor league assignment, so it was like a 10-day original timeline when he was supposed to come back. before he ended up, having a setback in his ramp up. But there was a spot for, Mark Vientos to be the DH for 10 days. And instead they went with DJ Stewart and Zach Short on the roster. And it was a mistake, clearly, because you didn't get JD Martinez back until May, if I'm not mistaken, or late in April, whatever it was. And they missed a real window where Vientos could have got some run. I don't know if they'll learn from that and start Acuña with the big league club, or that's still the way they operate, where they say, you know what, this is a player that needs to be developing in AAA. That's the most important thing. And they put Acuña there, in which case they'd roster one of these other guys as a stopgap. But then you could be in a position where a left-handed starter's on the mound, and you could see one on opening day with Framber Valdez with the Astros, or Luis de los Santos is your starting second baseman on opening day, which would just be wild. So I really hope we don't see that. I hope we get both Acuña and Baty on the roster, because these two guys could form a really nice platoon to start the season, where left-handed starters on the mound, it's Acuña. Right-handed starter on the mound, it's Baty. Acuña can come in late as a defensive replacement. You have two guys that really bring a lot to the table, and they can sort of split the time down the middle. The other side of it is maybe you just want to play Brett Baty every single day at second base. And you want to just give him the run because you need to see what he can do against big league pitching. He's riding a hot bat. See if he can keep that up in the playoffs. Or excuse me, in the playoffs. Yeah, hopefully, if and when the Mets get there. See if he can keep that up in the regular season. So I think those are all the options for the New York Mets right now. It's clearly going to be one of Baty or Acuña as the primary second baseman. It could be both of them in a platoon. The Mets just have to decide what the best course of action is. And I think Jeff McNeil is going to weigh into this because, again, the timeline for this is 3 to 4 weeks, and it's 7 to 10 days of rest. So if Jeff McNeil next Thursday, 7 days into this thing, feeling great, nothing else showing in an MRI, he's good to ramp himself up, and he already starts swinging at the end of camp, well, then maybe the Mets are looking at it and say, you know what, he's going to be back 8 games into the season. Why even play with Acuña coming up? Let's just have Luis de los Santos start on the big league roster. We'll let Baty get those 8 starts because why not? And then Jeff McNeil is going to re-enter the fold. Or they might say, well, he's going to be back in 8 days. But from a 40-man roster perspective, Luis de los Santos and Donovan Walton are both not on the roster. So you could just roster the guys that are there. And, Acuña at some point is going to be sent down. Baty might as well. They each have one option left, and that is an option year. So that doesn't mean you can get sent down once. It means if you get optioned, you then are in the middle of an option year, and you can get optioned up and down as many as 5 times throughout a season. So if they were going to put Acuña in Syracuse to start the year, they're already using an option anyway. So why not delay that 8 days until Jeff McNeil is good to return off the 10-day IL? That's really going to weigh into this a little bit, but let's just say there's a setback. Or, even if it's not a crazy setback, if you get to the end of a 10-day window and they say, we're going to let Jeff McNeil wait 1 more week. And now all of a sudden, you might be looking at maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's 3 weeks, maybe it's a month of the season where second base is out for the open or is up for grabs. Which of these 2 players makes more sense to be the Mets starting second baseman this year? Which one of these guys is better positioned to Wally Pipp, Jeff McNeil, and take that spot and not let it up? I want to talk about that in a minute. Also, I was at Port St. Lucie and watched Brett Baty play some second base. So we're going to touch on that as well. Can he really hold down that position defensively? We're going to go through it all in just a minute. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 in extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. Staying in on the action is key with the tournament games that are happening almost every day. And there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around, so just visit FanDuel.com to get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers by opening day. We are within 500. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Thursday was a great day for me because I drove up to Port St. Lucie with my dad to catch Mets versus Red Sox. It's a tradition that goes 20 years now. It was actually amazing when I was a kid. My dad would always take me during the week because he would pull me out of school and he would play hooky from work and we'd drive down, catch a game. There used to be a Friendlies. I miss that Friendlies dearly. I wonder if any of you recall that Friendlies. It's now at Denny's, and that's just not the same. But yeah, we'd catch the game. We'd go to the Friendlies after, get a nice ice cream sundae, come home. It was one of my favorite traditions, probably my favorite annual tradition as a kid growing up as a Mets fan. So it's always good to have that experience of going to Port St. Lucie. It's not easy for me because along with Locked On Mets, I also am the managing editor at justbaseball.com. So I have a writing staff that relies on me each day to keep the lights on for our website. And so to pull myself away from the computer and be gone for a whole day, a little bit tough, but it is always well worth it. I also want to give a quick shout out to Eric and Steve, who I met over by concessions, ran into somebody who recognized me. It was good talking to you guys. And hopefully you are tuning into the show today to hear your shout out. I'm sure you are. You did really affirm to me that you're an everyday listener. So anyway, let's talk about what I saw during the game. And I don't want to get into takeaways about too many things. You know, the Mets didn't score in this game until late when all the replacements were in. David Peterson didn't look great, but didn't look horrible either. He still saw the swing and miss stuff. He did give up a home run on the first pitch that he threw, but overall 3 2/3, couple runs, no big deal. Edwin Diaz came on. He got hit a little bit hard at the beginning, but ended up with a scoreless frame. Ryan Stanek did his thing. So, there wasn't too many big takeaways, except for the fact that I got to watch Brett Baty play 7 innings of second base. And there was definitely some moments where he didn't look like a second baseman. I'm just going to be honest. He made an error. Now, the ball was hit really hard. It did take a funky hop, but do I think Luisangel Acuña makes that play? Yes, I think Luisangel Acuña makes that play. I saw Brett Baty try to turn two. Was the form bad? No. Did he turn two? Wasn't quite in time. Again, do I think Acuña is maybe a little bit quicker on that turn? Potentially. I don't think that Brett Baty is going to look like Daniel Murphy out there. In fact, you saw him first inning, range up the middle, make a great, diving stop, and a one hop throw to first that was on target. Saw him make another running, play that the throw actually took Pete Alonso off the bag, but he ended up recovering and making the tag. And then there was a soft liner hit to Baty, and I believe that's pretty much all the action that he got. But it was a fair amount of it. The thing that I recognize from watching this game is how often the second baseman is in play, which sounds obvious, but until you're watching a game, you just don't think about all the little intricacies. Turning two, obviously, is big. Putting a tag down at second base on a base stealer, that's not something that Brett Baty has done. I mean, yeah, it happens at third base, but not with the consistency of covering second as a second baseman. And there's a lot more action there. Not that he was incredibly slow. I don't want to say that I blame him on that, but it's just recognizing how frequently he's going to be getting in there. Now, I think Brett Baty can be an average second baseman. And I even think there's a world when he plays the position enough where he actually could get to the point where he's above average. I really do think so. I think he has got to that place at third base where he is an above average defensive third baseman. And I think with time, he's a good enough athlete to do that at second base. I really believe that to be the case. I don't think that his range is too poor. I don't think that the footwork is too difficult. I think he'd figure it out. But Luisangel Acuña is a natural middle infielder. So when you're just talking about the defensive side of things, Acuña is going to be a significantly better defender to start the season than Brett Baty is. But he's also not going to bring you what Baty does with the bat. And I saw Brett Baty take a lot of at-bats today, and a lot of them were left on left, and he was never out of it at bat. He, drew a really tough walk. He got a base hit where I think he fell behind in the count and then, sort of, got himself even. And then he, recognized the breaking ball and reached down and got it and flared a base hit. Like Brett Baty as a hitter is, in my opinion, far advanced to what Luisangel Acuña is right now. And I think when you're talking about impact, a guy that, over the course of a season would actually be able to maybe get to a 20 home run mark. Like Baty has that. As much as Acuña flashed the pop when he made that cameo last year, I don't know how likely that's going to be to continue because Acuña, those home runs didn't necessarily come against the best pitching. And when the league adjusts to him and starts to scout for him, I think that the power is really not going to be there. But if he puts bat on ball, there's a world where Acuña can figure it out offensively. I just can't imagine that this year, if you're just talking about like WRC plus or OPS plus, or these stats that measure hitters on a league average of 100, I can't see Acuña this year putting up a 125 WRC plus, which is really good. Okay, that is a high mark, or even to say 115, like a clearly above average hitter. I think best case scenario, Acuña is going to keep his head above water. And if he does that, his defense and speed are going to put him in a position to be a well above average starting second baseman. And that floor is so stinking high because watching him and Francisco Lindor up the middle would be magic. They would be so good together. With that said, Brett Baty adds intrigue. Brett Baty could out-hit Jeff McNeil. So if Brett Baty gets some runway early in this season because Jeff McNeil's out and the Mets want to see what they have in Baty because they have been watching his at-bats and they do think he is the best hitter to plug into the lineup. If that actually ends up happening, I could see a world where Brett Baty does really hit well. I mean, this is a guy that if everything was right, he could hit for a high average, he can get on base at a good clip, and he can even throw in a little bit of pop. He has a sweet swing from the left side, and throughout his minor league career, he has had good plate discipline. He has put himself in good positions. The only question typically for his minor league career has been whether he gets to that point where he's hitting the ball on the ground too much instead of lifting, and you want him to get into his pull side power. That's where you could see Baty really elevate, when it comes to, the power potential of being a 20 home run guy, getting into that pull side pop, or even better too, spraying doubles, line to line. I mean, that when Brett Baty's hitting line drives, that's when he's right. So I look at those two players and they offer different things. And that's why a platoon is really interesting to start the season, because you can get a little bit of both, and Acuña can hedge Baty's defense a little bit, where late in games, I'm pulling Brett Baty. Now, if you want to, you can put Brett Baty at third, and you can have, Acuña at second base late in games. I think that might depend on where you're at in the starting lineup. Where do you want to plug Acuña in? How close is the game? All of those different things. Ideally, you want to keep Vientos' bat in the lineup, so maybe it is Acuña coming in for Baty. If it's a 2-1 game in the eighth inning, I probably want Acuña out there defensively. So I think these guys can pair well together. But when Jeff McNeil comes back, a decision will have to be made. And the question then becomes, who complements Jeff McNeil on the roster more? Who makes sense? Can one of these guys flash enough in whatever that limited time is that they even push McNeil a little bit to the point where he might not just be given everyday run at second base upon his return? I want to close there in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all the money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. So you can track shared and personal accounts. You can set goals. You can stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure to become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. So now getting to the question of the show today. Could Jeff McNeil get Wally Pipped with this injury? I think it is probably unlikely that Jeff McNeil comes back and is relegated to the bench. It's not a long enough injury. And granted, I know the whole point of being Wally Pipped is it is usually a minor injury where someone takes that little crack with the door open and barges through it. But I just think there's too many deficiencies for either of the two guys to be the full-time starting second baseman when Jeff McNeil returns. Because with Baty, there's still going to be work to be done with the glove. With Acuña, there's still development that needs to be done with the bat. So I think ultimately the Mets start the year with both of these guys. If Brett Baty looks good in his at-bats and Jeff McNeil comes up, I would imagine it is Acuña that goes down. The issue there, or the question there is, how does Baty complement Jeff McNeil? And the answer is not very well, because they're both left-handed. And so now if you have a lefty on the mound, who are you starting? Probably Jeff McNeil. But they aren't that direct complement the way that Acuña is to a left-hander, because obviously he swings the bat right-handed. With that said, I think you just got to roster the best guys. And I think Baty, in that utility role that we've been talking about, is a good soft landing spot for now, because you can see how playing time can clear up in other avenues. If another injury happens to someone in the corners, whether that's Alonso or Vientos, obviously Baty is probably going to be your guy. If something happens, with Brandon Nimmo out in left field, you could see Jesse Winker play left. Today in this game, we did watch Brandon Nimmo get back in the lineup and DH. That could be something to do in the beginning of the season as well. Nimmo can DH and Winker can play left. If Nimmo's out, Winker goes to left. Now, all of a sudden, I think you open the door to a really good lineup that incorporates the youth, where Mark Vientos is DHing, Brett Baty is at third, and Acuña could be at second. That's a lot of fun for learning what the Mets have in 2026. Trying to win in 2025, a lot of question marks there, right? There's a lot of question marks if you get to a point where you're starting both Acuña and Baty. But when I look at the outlook right now of second base, I think Baty is the guy to be a little more excited about because of the bat. I think Acuña is someone to be really excited about, but he needs a longer rope than he'll get with an injury like this, especially where Baty's on the roster, where I just don't think that they're going to play Acuña every single day and sit Baty on the bench instead of giving him big league at-bats. And I think Acuña needs at-bats to get to where he has to. As a hitter, he needs more time to develop to be an above-average hitter. I already know right now that Luisangel Acuña can be an incredible bench player for the next decade, honestly. A guy that can play great defense, give you a little bit of intrigue offense. Like, that's already there. That's already clear. He already fits that mold. For him to be the starting second baseman for the New York Mets, though, I think he needs to go down to AAA and have success there offensively and prove that, oh, wow, Luisangel Acuña can hit 280, 290. He can take that elite bat to ball and hit for a high average. If Acuña can hit for a high average, he is going to be a legit player, and he should be the starting second baseman of the future. I just haven't seen that yet. So I want him to continue to develop. And with Baty, all that's left to prove is that he can do it, on a big league roster against major league pitching. You send him to AAA, what does that gain? So I think this injury, it's one of those things where you have injuries like Francisco Alvarez where you say, all right, Luis Torrens is going to start, and it's a setback. Hopefully Alvarez can be back on the sooner end of his timetable. Who's going to be the backup catcher? And you're sort of just talking about the fallout, and there's not a lot of silver linings that can be drawn. When an injury opens the door for a young player, it's a weird dichotomy where there's part of you that says, man, that sucks because Jeff McNeil is a big leaguer who can help you in a lot of ways. He's your insurance for Brandon Nimmo in left field. He's a guy that can play right, and he was swinging a pretty decent bat in spring training. He was looking good. So he's still the guy, and I've talked about it throughout spring, who has the most upside offensively this season at second base. It's probably Jeff McNeil. Because Jeff McNeil still is only a couple years removed from a batting title, and 40 games in the second half last year, he posted a 150, I think it was 152 WRC plus, which is elite. So there is still that in there for Jeff McNeil to be a really good hitter. And we forget that at times. But when you think about this injury, because it's opening the door to some kids, you get that little excitement of, ooh, what's Brett Baty going to look like starting at second base on opening day? And I'm excited to see how they go about the roster construction, how they deploy these guys. And if it is a platoon, and we see a platoon at second base, and let's say they get 3 whole weeks of run during the season before Jeff McNeil can return. So they get 3 weeks, each of them. Let's just say you get, let's say there's 20 games. 20 games Jeff McNeil misses at the start of the season. And we'll say Baty starts 12 and Acuña starts 8. That would be at least a little bit of a sample size for us to start to draw some judgments. And if through those 12 starts for Brett Baty, he's hitting 320 and he's carrying over what he's doing in spring and he's popped couple home runs, all of a sudden Jeff McNeil is not going to start every day, but I think it's going to still be a slow burn for either of these guys to earn that spot away from McNeil, because McNeil is still going to get some opportunities upon return. I don't think that they're ready to staple him to the bench. It would have to be such an outstanding run from these two guys, or from one of the two, for them to really consider that. And generally, these situations will always be, you always wonder how everyone fits until another injury pops up. So that can always sort of be the answer to all of this. I don't think that Jeff McNeil is going to get Wally Pipp from this injury, but I do think this can help Baty and or Acuña start their season on a good note and maybe carry the momentum forward to be a better contributor throughout the season. Whereas if they started the season and McNeil was in the lineup 5 out of 6 games and it was just a very minimal role for either of those guys, it might be harder to get their feet wet. This is a way they might get their feet wet. And you never know. It could actually be a blessing in disguise if all of a sudden one of them jumps out and turns into a player that you're relying on as more than just a backup utility infielder. So we'll see how this story progresses. One thing I will say, Brett Baty should not play another inning at third base this spring. At this point, you got to crash course him at second base and give him as much time at the position as possible, because that's the only issue. I really don't think that he can't figure out second. Like I believe at some point this year, if he was tearing the cover off the ball and the Mets just decide, you know what, this is our infield now. It's Baty at second and it's Vientos at third and it's Alonso at first. Man, it's a shaky defense. But if that happened, I think as the season wore on, Baty would start to put the pieces together. Acuña, if the Mets decided to go that route, he's going to give you the defensive side of things. And again, that provides you a very high floor to build off of. So it's good options. It's good options. If the Mets were going to lose any of their guys for opening day, after already dropping Alvarez, McNeil plugs a bunch of holes, but he's also the guy that you can lose and you're excited about the alternatives. Something happens in the outfield, you're not feeling great. I guess the best bet would be if Nimmo went down, you'd have Winker, but I'm not excited about that. There's no silver lining in that. It's just, okay, I guess the Mets can get by. If something happened in any other spot in the infield, you'd be a lot more pressed. So if you had to lose somebody, McNeil is a guy that you can lose and you can get around the loss, and you might end up being better for it in the long run if one of these guys can take advantage of this opportunity that's going to present itself to them. So we'll see how it all shakes out. That's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review where I get your podcast. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. After your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. By Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.